All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into a topic that I think is going to hit pretty close to home for a lot of us.
Hmm.
We're talking President Trump's proposed steel and aluminum tariffs. Our main source for this deep dive is a recent FreightWaves article. And let me tell you, this one has implications for industries, for global trade, and yeah, even for your own wallet. So you're going to want to stick with us for this one.
You know what's especially interesting here? It's that these tariffs are really targeting specifically the U.S.'s closest trading partners,
Yeah,
Canada and Mexico. And that could have a pretty big ripple effect. I mean, this could impact everything. You think about supply chains, international relations even, all throughout North America.
yeah, for sure. That's a great point. And to make things even more interesting, Trump just went ahead and announced this 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports. No exceptions, no special treatment. Canada, Mexico, anybody else, 25%.
Yeah, you're right. It's a complete 180 from what he was doing before. Remember how he initially imposed tariffs, but then was like, okay, certain countries are exempt, Canada, Mexico, Brazil. But now he's completely flipping the script. And this could really throw a wrench into things, especially for industries that, they depend on these metals.
Okay, so let me try to make sure I get this. The article, it says that Canada supplies over $11 billion worth of steel, and then another $9 billion on top of that in aluminum to the U.S. every year. That makes them the top supplier,
It
right?
does.
And Mexico, they're sitting at number 2 for steel with $6.5 billion.
Yeah.
Those are huge numbers.
They are.
What kind of impact are we really looking at here?
So those numbers are big because they show us just how many resources are moving between these countries. I mean, it's a lot. And these tariffs, they have the potential to make Canadian and Mexican steel and aluminum way more expensive for U.S. buyers, obviously.
Yeah.
And that could really drive up the costs for a bunch of industries. You think about construction, automotive, even defense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's kind of hitting everybody.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that the Canadian industry minister, he actually had some strong words about all of this. He was basically saying that these tariffs could actually hurt U.S. national security by making key industries less competitive. And he even said that this trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, it actually, strengthens North American security as a whole. What do you think about that?
It's an interesting argument for sure, because when you think about it, the defense industry, shipbuilding, automotive manufacturing, they all need steel and aluminum. So if these tariffs make those materials more expensive, it could really make North American companies less competitive, on a global scale. And then if costs go up for things like infrastructure projects that are really important, well, that could have an impact on national security too.
Okay, so what you're saying is it's not just about the money. It's about these tariffs could actually weaken how connected the North American economies are,
Right.
and maybe even make us less secure.
Exactly. And you know what we haven't even talked about yet? Reciprocal tariffs. Trump even mentioned this. He said if other countries start putting tariffs on U.S. goods, he's going to hit back with tariffs of our own. Doesn't that sound kind of like a recipe for a trade war?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like things could get out of control pretty quickly. I mean, if one country puts tariffs up and then the other one retaliates, where does it end?
Exactly.
We could be looking at some serious price increases on everyday things even.
Right. And that's the real risk with this tit for tat approach to trade. It
Yeah.
creates this cycle that can really hurt everyone. You got to think about the price of your car, the cost of building materials if you're, building a house, even just appliances. All that stuff could be affected by a trade war.
So what you're saying is
Yeah.
these tariffs, they have the potential to go way beyond just the steel and aluminum industries
Yeah.
and actually impact the prices of stuff that we all use every single day.
Absolutely. The effects could be really big, and that's why it's so important to try to understand this whole situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up part 1. And that's what we try to do here on the Deep Dives, right? Help you guys understand the bigger picture, connect the dots.
Exactly. So as we go forward with this conversation, I want everyone listening to think about this. How could these tariffs affect these trade negotiations that are already happening, especially with NAFTA? Could this lead to a global trend where everybody starts putting up more and more trade barriers? It's something to think about for sure as we go further down this rabbit hole.
Great questions to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we will be back with more right after the break. It's really interesting, how this whole thing just shows how tricky it is, trying to find that balance between protecting industries here at home and at the same time encouraging global trade. It seems like everybody's got a different take on the right way to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue. And there are good arguments on both sides, for sure. Some people really believe that protecting domestic industries, that's super important for national security and for making sure we have jobs here in the U.S. Their argument is that tariffs, like these ones, they level the playing field, so to speak, and then American companies can actually compete better.
Right, but wouldn't that also mean that things get more expensive for people buying stuff here? And what about the industries that need to import steel and aluminum? Won't they end up paying more too?
That's the thing. There's always a trade-off. Tariffs, yeah, they might help certain industries in the short term, but then there are these unintended consequences you got to think about. It's like a chain reaction, right? Raw materials get more expensive, so manufacturers have to pay more, which means higher prices for consumers in the end. That ripple effect, it can affect the whole economy.
And it goes beyond just the money part of it too, right? The article even said that Canada and Mexico, they've already kind of hinted that they might retaliate if these tariffs actually happen. That could really mess things up with our closest allies, our
Right,
neighbor.
absolutely. It's not just about the economics. There's a big geopolitical aspect to this, too. These tariffs,
Yeah.
they could damage the relationships the U.S. has built with Canada and Mexico over a long time. And if those relationships get strained, well, that can have a lot of different consequences. Cooperation on security, working together on environmental stuff, all of that could be affected.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Let's say the U.S. government says, look, these tariffs are important to protect American jobs and make sure trade is fair. How would you respond to that?
I mean, it's a valid point, right? You got to think about the possibility of jobs being lost here if foreign competition isn't really fair. But the thing is, when you look at history, protectionist policies, they often end up having these consequences that nobody expected. Like, take the steel and aluminum industries, for example. Maybe the tariffs do protect some jobs there. But then you could see job losses in other industries, ones that need to import those materials, like the car industry or construction.
Right, because if those companies have to pay more for the materials they need, they might have to raise their prices or even cut jobs just to stay in business.
Exactly. So it's a really complicated situation. You have winners and losers on both sides, basically, and there's no simple answer.
Yeah.
I think the important thing is that policymakers, they got to look at how everything will be affected, the whole economy, not just a few specific industries.
It sounds like we're talking about trying to find a really delicate balance. On one hand, you want to protect your own interests, your own industries. But on the other hand, you don't want to start a trade war that hurts everyone, here and in other countries.
You put it perfectly. And this brings us back to that bigger picture, right? Global trade. And what role agreements like NAFTA play in all of this? The North American Free Trade Agreement. It was meant to encourage free trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but it's been a controversial topic for years now.
Oh yeah, NAFTA's definitely been a hot-button issue. Some people say it's been good for the economy, and then others say it's led to job losses.
Right, exactly. And now, with this whole tariff situation, it adds a whole new level of complexity to the NAFTA renegotiations that are already going on.
Okay, hold on. So NAFTA is actually being renegotiated right now.
Yeah, there have been discussions going on for a while about updating NAFTA. All three countries are involved. They're trying to figure out how to modernize the agreement,
Yeah.
to match the current economic and political situation.
That makes sense. So how could these proposed tariffs affect those negotiations? Could they make it harder to reach an agreement?
That's a really good question. And it's something that a lot of experts are watching closely. Some people think these tariffs could make the negotiations more adversarial. Like, it'll be harder to find common ground. But then others say that the tariffs might actually give the U.S. more leverage.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a high-stakes poker game. Everybody's trying to figure out what the other side has and make the best move. And what happens with these negotiations, it could have a big impact on the future of trade in North America and maybe even globally.
It feels like we're at a turning point, almost. The decisions that are made about trade in the next few months, the next few years, they could have effects that last for a long time. For the global economy, I mean.
You're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important for everyone to pay attention, to really think about this stuff, and to talk about the potential consequences.
Yeah, whether we like it or not.
Mhm.
What happens with global trade, it affects all of us. The prices we pay, the jobs that are available, even the relationships between countries.
That's exactly it. So as we keep talking about this, the steel tariffs, NAFTA, the possibility of a trade war, I want you to think about this. If a trade war actually happened, how could that affect the prices you pay for things, the services you use? Could it affect your job? It's something worth thinking about as we dig deeper into this whole global trade thing.
So we've talked about how this could affect North America, but I'm kind of curious about the bigger picture here. Like, could these tariffs, and maybe even a trade war, could that set off like a chain reaction around the whole world?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something that, economists and political analysts, they're all debating it right now. Some people think this could be the start of like a shift toward more protectionism on a global scale. It's like a domino effect, right? If one big player starts putting up trade barriers, others might feel like they have to do the same thing.
So instead of having this like interconnected global economy that we've been seeing develop, we could end up going back to like more isolated economic policies.
Exactly. Imagine a world where every country just focuses on its own industries and workers, even if it means consumers have to pay higher prices. And they have less access to stuff from other countries. That's the risk you run with protectionism, if it goes too far.
Yeah, that's a little bit scary, honestly. But couldn't there be some good things about countries focusing on their own production?
There could be, yeah. Some people argue that it creates jobs, and it helps local economies. It can also make countries less reliant on global supply chains, which some people see as a weakness, especially when there's a crisis happening.
Okay, so it sounds like there are two sides to this coin. What are some examples, like from history, of protectionist policies and how did they turn out?
Well, there's one that always comes up, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, back in 1930. So this was after the Great Depression started. The U.S. put tariffs on thousands of imported goods. The idea was to protect American jobs. But a lot of economists think that it actually made the Depression worse because other countries retaliated with their own tariffs. And it ended up stifling global trade.
So it kind of had the opposite effect of what they wanted.
Yeah, it's definitely a cautionary tale. Of course, every situation is different, and it's hard to know for sure what will happen this time. But I think we can learn something from history.
It seems like we're at a crossroads with all of this. The decisions that are made about trade, they could have a big impact on the global economy for years to come.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for everyone to stay informed, to talk about these issues, and to really think about the potential consequences.
Right, because whether we realize it or not, global trade affects us all. It affects the prices we pay, the jobs we have, even the relationships between countries.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into steel tariffs, NAFTA, and all this talk of a trade war, I want to leave you with this thought. Don't just sit back and watch the news happen. Engage with it. Think critically about the information you see, ask questions, and come to your own conclusions.
I like that. Be an informed citizen. Don't just be a bystander. Well, we've covered a lot today, from the possibility of prices going up to the history of protectionism and what might happen with global trade in the future. It's a lot to take in, but hopefully this deep dive has helped you understand this issue a little bit better and the potential effects it could have on all of us.
And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. Keep learning about this as things develop. Challenge your own views and keep talking about the future of trade and what it means for the world.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of global trade. It's always changing. And we'll be back soon to explore more fascinating topics with you.